Hi, thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Jessica Wingert, and I am the program lead for ClimateCAP based here at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. We're so excited to kick our new virtual education series, the MBA Academy, Understanding the Business of Climate, with a conversation with Jamie Alexander from Drawdown Labs today. I'll introduce Jamie in just a moment, but I wanted to start with a little bit of more information about ClimateCAP. So ClimateCAP is a global partnership of 38 business schools founded and led by us here at Fuqua. And it really came together with the goal of preparing tomorrow's business leaders, which are today's MBA students, many of you here on the call, to understand and respond to the climate challenge by mainstreaming this climate conversation in business school. We have a few programs that we offer throughout the year, and I wanted to highlight those for you here today, as we've got some exciting deadlines and things coming up here in the next few weeks and months. So our flagship event is our annual MBA Summit, and this is an in-person event. Last year it was held at the University of Texas McCombs School of Business. You can see some photos there on the screen. And it brings together over 350 students from different business schools together to network, connect, learn about this climate and business challenge that we are all facing. We're thrilled to be looking forward to our next summit hosted by the University of Michigan Ross School of Business, which will be held on February 9th and 10th of next year. Tickets are going on sale in late October, so please be sure to register for our mailing list and keep an eye out on our different social media channels for information on when registration will open up. The event does tend to sell out fast, so if you're interested in coming, please stay tuned for that information. Our next program I wanted to highlight is our ClimateCAP MBA Fellowship. So this is a program for students who really want to go deep into this climate conversation, and it's a year-long fellowship for 12 students that really works to empower the students to become the next generation of climate leaders and change makers. The smiling faces you see on the screen were our first cohort who are just wrapping up their first year right now, and we're thrilled to be opening up the 2024 cohort applications on October 3rd of this year. Again, you can find more information about the program, about the application on our website. We do a lot of really interesting work together. We have speakers, we have mentorship, we have learning and education series, and fellows also all work on climate action projects of their choice over the course of the fellowship. So it's a really great way to get additional experience in the climate space during your MBA experience. And last but not least, the MBA Academy. So you're here with us today, so you've heard about the program, but this is going to be a monthly series that we're going to be doing throughout the academic year. So please be sure to tune back in for future sessions as well. And we'll be hearing from business leaders, academic thought leaders, and entrepreneurs about their experiences and their recommendations on how to really navigate this new climate economy. Registration for future sessions is also available on our website, and we hope to see you at a future MBA Academy event as well. So with that, please visit climatecap.org to learn more. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram as well, and we look forward to connecting you at a future event. But with that, I'm going to do an intro for our speaker today. We are absolutely thrilled to have Jamie Alexander, the founding director of Drawdown Labs, here with us to talk about every MBA job is a climate job. Jamie is a climate activist, mom, and the founding director of Drawdown Labs. Project Drawdown's private sector testing ground for accelerating the scaling of climate solutions quickly, safely, and equitably. Jamie developed and launched Drawdown Labs in early 2020 and has led the program to push the boundaries of private sector climate action. Jamie joined Project Drawdown from Ceres, working with companies to set ambitious emission reduction targets and leveraging their influence in support of strong climate and clean energy policies. She also has served as a civil and foreign service officer with USAID for the nonprofit, the Cultural Conservancy, and the UN Office for the Secretary General. As I mentioned today, Jamie will discuss how every MBA job is a climate job and how MBAs can see climate opportunities within their different functions. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie for a presentation, and then we'll take any questions that you have through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen whenever you're ready. All right, thanks. Jamie, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you for having me today. And thanks to all of you for joining. I am going to quickly share my screen. 1 second. Let me get set up quickly. Hopefully that is working, Jessica.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, it's really an honor to be here with all of you today. I think really when I think about the people in this Zoom, people who are climate aware, climate concerned, and working or positioned to work inside the world of business, I really genuinely think you all are some of the most well-positioned and powerful people in the world right now, given what we're facing in terms of climate change. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about why I think that a little bit later, but thank you so much again for the opportunity to join you. So this is one of my favorite topics about how to make every job a climate job, or specifically every MBA job a climate job. And I think, this is not hyperbole. The phrase absolutely must be true if the world of business is going to align with our planetary limitations. And I think this is where corporate sustainability work needs to be, not just one job function, but every job function contributing in every department, every sector, inside every company or financial institution, using their climate passion and their expertise to drive change rapidly in the world. So first, a bit about Project Drawdown, the nonprofit organization that I work for. So we're a nonprofit that is laser focused on climate solutions. So our organization started with the publication of the book Drawdown, which was really the world's first effort at kind of lifting up and communicating what the biggest solutions to climate change are. What are the solutions? Are they ready to scale in the world? How much do they cost? What's the return on investment, and how much will they reduce emissions over time? And spoiler alert, our research showed that we do already have the solutions in hand today that we need to limit global warming to where the science says we need to. So since this book, we've really emerged as the world's leading resource for climate solutions. And our mission is to help the world stop climate change as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. So I'm the director of a program at Project Drawdown called Drawdown Labs, where I work closely with businesses, investors, climate funders to support and accelerate their climate work. So I sort of swim in this question every day, and I'm sort of curious if this resonates with any of you. How can we make capitalism compatible with thriving life on our planet? And sort of how do we square this need, this incessant need for profit and growth in the business world with the limitations that the planet is showing us to be true? So I work with one foot in the world of climate science and one foot in the world of business and finance. And so I sort of swim in this question, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share some of my learnings and thoughts on the merging of these two worlds of business and climate, and hopefully to hear some of your insights as well. So I want to anchor our session today in the anchor of time, because really time is the most important variable when we think about what needs to happen to address climate change. In a recent climate report, there was what to me was a very poignant line that said, every ton of CO2 emissions, which cause climate change, every ton of CO2 emissions adds to global warming. And since that report, time has been quietly slipping by, and every second, more and more greenhouse gases continue pouring into the atmosphere, which is causing this, planetary instability that we are seeing play out all around us. So every day matters. This line here shows where we are right now. The red line shows the greenhouse gas emissions that are churning into our atmosphere every minute through, everyday human behavior, which is causing climate change, going up and up. And we are today at that red circle, an inflection point, and hopefully a turning point where we must dramatically reduce the emissions that we humans are putting into the atmosphere. So this is what we mean by the emissions curve. We're at that red dot right where you on the screen, and what we need to do is bend that curve dramatically downward, so reduce or avoid our emissions dramatically in the next few years. The circled area is perhaps the most important area of the whole graph, that yellow circle. And that's where we make this dramatic pivot. So from now until 2030, we need to cut our emissions in half. So we have 6.5 years to do incredibly difficult, but transformational things. And I think, some people in the climate movement argue that businesses caused this problem in the first place. So how can they be the ones to solve the problem? And we need to reinvent capitalism or move toward a different economic model. But I would argue that we probably can't complete, a full economic revolution first and then solve climate change in the next 6.5 years. Because what we do in 100 years, around our, a different economic model or whatever, what we do in 100 years doesn't really matter if we don't do what needs to be done in the next 6.5 years. So I think part of what I feel when I work on, at the intersection of business and climate change is that, we have to kind of hold two seemingly contradictory truths at once. One is that we have to move as fast as humanly possible to cut emissions this decade. And therefore, we need to operate within the system that we have right now, within the economic system that we have right now. And on the other hand, to acknowledge that part of what has gotten into this problem in the first place is, an incessant focus on economic growth. And we can't look at this problem as one that we can grow our way out of. So how do we hold these two truths at once is one thing that I grapple with quite often. And one way that I'm working on squaring that circle or reconciling those two truths is by trying to be a really good climate operator inside the existing system. And that's why I say that, I think you all are very well positioned to really help transform the system from the inside. So how can we, use within the next 6.5 years, how can we sort of leverage some of the elements of capitalism that, and inside businesses that we need to do this decade for climate action? So even if you do feel like we need to move toward a different economic model, we might need to think like capitalists for the next, for the 2020s. So again, I would argue that you all are the most important people in the world right now, caring about climate change and poised to enter into or kind of grow inside the existing system. So we have now kind of anchored our conversation today in the critical importance of time. And now let's focus on how we can use the tools of business to help the world achieve our climate goals with sort of a specific focus on the next 6.5 years. So how do we leverage the tools, the influence, the resources of business to help create that sort of dramatic bending of the emissions curve in the 2020s? That's what we'll talk about now. So first, the concept and engine of economic growth. How do we use business to grow climate solutions? We can really, the concept of profit and endless growth may be part of what got us into this crisis, but growth isn't all bad, right? There are lots of things that need to grow. But what should grow is a really important question, and what perhaps, shouldn't. So what we see on your screen here is Project Drawdown's depiction of the climate solutions that I mentioned earlier. Almost 100 solutions, the outer circle on your screen, are the climate solutions that our team has analyzed and determined to be sufficient to address climate change. That's what should grow, right? These are solutions across the electricity sector, food and agriculture sector, transportation, buildings. So we already have the solutions to the climate crisis. They're at our fingertips, and these solutions are, sort of the bread and butter of Project Drawdown. And for all of you, as you're thinking about what job you might take on or where you might grow within your existing sort of discipline, I would think about, is this business or is this sector that I'm thinking about entering into actively in the business of scaling climate solutions, or do they have an ability or a willingness to pivot or to work on scaling climate solutions as part of their very business model? I would really, think about that question. And if they don't, or if they're, not at all thinking about how they can adapt to what we need to do in terms of climate change, I would have some questions about whether that business is sort of fit for the future. But I'm going to really quickly pause to do a quick high-level overview of sort of the highest level of these climate solutions. So first, electricity. The electricity sector is, as we all know, is the heaviest emitting sector in society, but it powers our lives, right? So we need to transform our electricity production and improve energy efficiency. So that means we need, solar panels and wind turbines and geothermal and new ways of producing energy. And we also need to work on energy efficiency so that we use less energy in the first place. So these are things like, green roofs, building automation systems, and many more. The second sort of climate solution sector that our team looks at is the food, agriculture, and land use sector. So this is the second biggest emitting sector globally, which makes it a huge opportunity for climate solutions. So we need people and businesses that are working on growing food more sustainably and regenerative agriculture, new ways of feeding people in ways that are good for the soil. We also have an opportunity to shift our diets to more plants and less meat. So businesses that are focused on, more climate-friendly ways of producing food, and then the critical question of food waste. So right now, 1/3 of the world's food is never eaten. So we need startups and farmers and cooks and all kinds of people working on this solution of addressing food waste. These are solutions in this sector are focused on addressing food waste and our diets. So if you're on a marketing team at a company, thinking about the food that you're serving at your events and how you're redistributing food waste or addressing food waste, that's a climate solution. We also need to figure out how to keep people cool as temperatures warm, working on what we call refrigerants. It's a material in air conditioners and refrigerators that contribute in major ways to greenhouse gas pollution. So we need engineers and building and construction companies and large-scale investments in that sector as well. And then the transportation sector. So the biggest contributor to the emissions that cause climate change in the United States is the transportation sector. We need to remake our cities and buildings so that they're more equitable and bikeable and walkable, and so that they can connect people without, having to get in a personally owned vehicle at all. And we also, of course, need to electrify the cars that are already on the road. Then the second to last sector of climate solutions that we've looked at is transforming our relationship with nature. So how we exist together with instead of at odds with nature. Because right now, nature in the ocean and on land absorbs about 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we put into the atmosphere every year. So that makes nature really important. We need to restore and protect those ecosystems so they can continue to do that important work for us. And lastly, access to reproductive health care and high quality education for people around the world. Those are fundamental human rights and they are climate solutions. And so we need, teachers and healthcare workers and businesses and startups focused on remote learning and healthcare apps and all kinds of things focused on this climate solution. Okay, so that was our whirlwind tour of the major sectors of climate solutions that we already have in hand. And we need businesses and people in jobs, kind of bringing those broad solutions into the world. And there you can do a much deeper dive on our website of the individual solutions within those. So back to the question of what should grow. So these are things that should grow, right? These are things that we need in society to address human well-being and planetary needs. This is where we would love to see more business growth, right? But we have to be clear that this is not just growth for growth's sake, but growth in hyper-strategic areas focused on sort of replacing or displacing the higher emitting ways we used to do things. And I think this is a thing we don't talk about enough in the climate solution space, that climate solutions are not just, an excuse for more growth. It's not just more for the sake of more. It's actually more to replace the way that we used to do things that we now know are incompatible with thriving life on our planet. So with that, so let's say you're inside of a business and you're working within a business that is, poised to scale one of these climate solutions, or you're hoping that they can pivot toward being part of the solution in the future. What can you do within a business once you're in a job, or, as you're figuring out where you want to focus in your MBA program? This is what we call the Drawdown Aligned Business Framework. And this was really our effort at looking across the business to say, you don't have to have a sustainability job to work on climate within a business. There are lots of ways, lots of leverage points that businesses have throughout many departments where they can use their influence, their clout, and their resources to help the broader world address climate change. So I'm going to quickly walk through each of these sort of leverage points. Again, these are different superpowers that most businesses have to help the world address climate change. And so hopefully this will, provide some thinking for what how your studies can contribute into future roles. So first, of course, businesses need to address, their emissions first and foremost. Since, we need to have our emissions very quickly, larger institutions, especially larger businesses, tend to be larger contributors to greenhouse gases. So accelerated timelines to reduce emissions and looking at, setting interim greenhouse gas emission reductions targets, et cetera. But also looking at, how the business operates in their community and all of the different the ecosystem that they act in. So businesses don't operate inside of a bubble, right? They have employees and customers and shareholders and communities. So how are companies bringing in and positively influencing all of these actors matters. The next is product partnerships and procurement. So how is a business using their influence to encourage their suppliers or the other businesses that they procure things from, or their partnerships to have even bigger climate related ripple effects? So when you're looking at, who the business that you work for partners with, are they selling into the fossil fuel sector? And can that be addressed somehow? Are you doing marketing or advertising for sectors that are, on the other side of the climate balance sheet? Can the business encourage their suppliers to set greenhouse gas emissions targets and more? Another area that businesses can use to influence climate change is investments and financing. So money is sort of the linchpin of our economy, and what it does while we're sleeping really matters. And right now, much of the current, much of the money that is operating within our current system is being funneled toward fossil fuels and other extractive industries. So capital is a huge catalyst in hitting our emissions reductions targets and financing climate solutions. Businesses can influence their banks by trying to encourage them to stop financing fossil fuels. They can provide green 401k options for their employees and more in that sector. Next up is climate disclosures. So every business has a climate-related risk and a climate impact. And it's critical that companies are transparent about their climate impacts. So that requires accountants inside the business looking at, they're doing their carbon accounting and then publicly disclosing that, that climate-related impact and how that provides a risk to the business. Climate policy advocacy. So businesses have a lot of clout when it comes to swaying legislators on key pieces of climate legislation. So how can businesses use their clout to help legislators enact bold climate policy? This is one example of a full-page ad that our team at Project Drawdown put in the New York Times last year with the business partners logos that you see at the bottom, where we really said when the Build Back Better Act was being debated in Congress, we decided now is the moment to have our businesses step up and say, we need strong federal climate action. And the last one is long-term thinking. So how can businesses help, kind of shift our current economic paradigm, noting that, companies need to integrate human and ecological well-being into their idea of success, while also kind of understanding that there is a need to focus on growth and profit, but having an additional value focused on the longer term health of our planet. So this is, again, what we call the Drawdown Aligned Business Framework. And my hope in sharing this with you is that it shows that there are many other ways of contributing to climate action inside businesses than, simply working on renewable energy or working, getting a job as a corporate sustainability officer. But this is a lot of stuff to be done, right? This is a lot of work for a company to do in addition to business as usual. But luckily, when we think of, sort of how, seeing climate action in terms of a more holistic and integrated framework, it really brings in more people from more parts of the business to help. So whatever discipline you're thinking about moving into as part of your MBA program, when we look at more holistic emissions reductions goals, that would bring in, data science, strategy teams, R&D, supply chain management. When we look at, climate disclosures or operations, it looks at, how do you bring more marketing and communications teams into climate action, or human resources, HR people that can, get green 401ks in all of, in all of their employees' hands. Legal teams are super important inside businesses for bringing, for addressing climate related concerns that employees may have, and addressing legal issues around climate action at work. Climate policy advocacy brings in government relations teams and public policy and community affairs, regulatory affairs, and so on. And so my point in showing this to you is to show, no matter whether you're thinking about moving into business finance or marketing or sales or whatever part of the business, there is a job to be done. And I want to show you quickly and credit my colleague who's also on this call, Ayana Bodhi, for creating a resource that I would really point you toward. So we looked at the 7 most common corporate job functions, and did an analysis and worked together with some of our corporate employees inside different job functions and some of our corporate partners to look at what are the specific actions and specific things that employees within, for example, human resources can take. And so we have one for in-house legal professionals and marketing teams and procurement teams. And so I really point you to these to look at, what are tangible actions that employees across the business can take to integrate climate action into your job. And so again, the climate crisis is far too big for any one team to work on, for any one, sustainability team to work on. And so all job functions across the business have a role to play. So no matter what, angle of your MBA program, wherever your focus is, there is a climate angle to it. Because the climate crisis is far too big. It doesn't fit into like one, siloed part of a business. It's kind of flooding and uprooting every aspect of our lives. And so we need to respond to it with that same level of expansiveness. So we need climate work to happen everywhere across all parts of the business by every job function and every person. And we are excited to be able to, work together and provide resources, hopefully for you to do that. And I will stop there, Jessica, if you want to move to the next portion of the session.
Great. Thank you so much for walking us through that. And just to let everyone know, we will be sending out an email after today's event with links to a lot of the resources that Jamie just mentioned. So they'll be coming to your inbox here shortly. I'm going to open it up to audience questions here momentarily. So if you do have any questions for Jamie, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A and we will get to them as soon as we can. But I wanted to kick us off with the first question. And you've given us a lot to consider when it comes to MBAs and where everyone can make their impact on climate. I want to take it to a higher level based on your career, based on your experience. What's one lesson that you've learned that you want every MBA to know?
That's such a great question. I think I have definitely grappled with the question of, of business and climate change and how to, sort of how to square that, how to square the focus on growth and profit with the limitations, I think, that our planet is showing us to be true. And I have really genuinely come out of that thinking that is the most powerful lever that we need to pull right now in the very, very vanishing window of time we have to make really huge changes across the economy. I think businesses, and especially employees going into businesses who are climate aware and climate, concerned, are the best positioned people to make change quickly and on a large scale. And so I've definitely grappled with in this world. And I think that's where I have come out of it most recently with thinking about the short time horizon, the big systemic changes we need to make. And I think this is a group, in this room is a group of people that are really, really well positioned to make change. And so my recommendation would be like, I think in the climate world, there is a lot of like, oh, who are the villains and who are the good guys and are activists and sustainability officers on the same side or on opposite sides. And I would argue like we are all very much on the same side, and we need to like remain that way and see ourselves as part of the same team, approaching this from different angles, with, activists having more of an outside strategy, and those of us who work inside, really strengthening our climate, our climate chops and understanding how we can best contribute from the inside.
Great, thank you. I will switch over to some questions from our audience. You showed some different sectors and different solutions for each of those sectors, but the question came in around some of the more sectors like banking, finance, insurance. Are you looking at expanding some of your analysis into other sectors as well?
In terms of our solution sectors?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the solutions that we ran through are sort of the what we need to do. We need, the things, right? The solar panels and the bikes and the, high-speed rail and the regenerative agriculture. The banking question and the regulatory and policy change, those are, I think, the how do we get, because, how do we, those are what we call accelerators within Project Drawdown. So making shifts in the financial system is an accelerator. Moving it away from the sources of the problem and toward climate solutions is a climate solution accelerator. The Inflation Reduction Act was a major climate solutions accelerator, right? It wasn't a solution on its own, but it's accelerating investment in heat pumps. It's accelerating investment, in renewable energy. And so I think that's where so we have that distinction between solutions and then accelerators that really can help bring those solutions into the world quickly.
A question, you mentioned access to reproductive health as one of the most important areas that we must focus on to fight climate change. She understands that for humanitarian reasons, but would like you to connect a little bit for us how that connects to climate change. If you don't mind elaborating on that one.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So access to high quality education and reproductive health care are fundamental human rights. And what research shows is that in communities, especially in communities in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, lower income countries, where those rights are in place, where there is access to education and reproductive health care, women are more empowered to make decisions about the size of their families. They're able to, contribute. They're educated so they can contribute. Women are often the smallholder farmers, and women tend to make better decisions around smallholder farm yields in interesting research than men. And so when women have access to, high quality education and reproductive health care, they tend to make different decisions about the size of their families, their livelihoods, and those correlate to better climate outcomes ultimately through the size of the family and what happens on like the land that they own. And so that result ends up having cascading effects throughout all of our solution models. And it does have implications for population. But the key that we focus on is they are fundamental human rights, and that is the reason that we should be doing them. And they have cascading benefits for the climate.
Great. Thank you. There's a few questions that have come up along this vein around sustainable growth. So the growth is going to happen, but how do we make sure that we're doing it well? So do you have any lessons or any examples that you can share around kind of changing that focus for the business community away from necessary consumption to a more sustainable growth, if possible?
Yeah, it is. Again, that is definitely something I have grappled with since day one. And I do think that we should think about growth in hyper strategic areas, and we should be clear-eyed about the fact that means that some other sectors are going to need to be phased out. And that has to be true. We cannot grow our way out of this. And so it must mean that these growth in these areas that we need, in climate solutions should not be additive. It should be, in place of, it should be going, it should be trying to replace the things that we're doing that same, we're filling that same need, but in a higher carbon intensive way. And I think, climate tech startups are, that are coming online that are focused hyper strategically on a climate solution, that have climate tech, in their DNA, is good, as long as it is like setting out to, not just to be additive, but setting out to really try to, change that sector. And so that means also working on policy advocacy and working to change the broader regulatory environment. And I think we're starting to see that more and more, where, I think founders and like the climate tech and VC community are recognizing that it has to be part of the effort must be not just to grow the business, but also to try to use their influence to shift their investment practices, to shift the financial picture. And then, I think there are things like, there are some things I've seen like within more traditional businesses, like Patagonia's announcement last year as a private company to sell the planet, or sell the company to Planet Earth and basically make Earth their biggest shareholder. I think there are things happening. There's another initiative called the Long-Term Stock Exchange that's trying to, you would know more about than I do, but that's trying to value, help companies place value in the longer term, not just the focus on short-term profits. But it is, I think this is a very central, very, very central theme that we need to align together on as a climate community. Again, that's why I think this, people and you all are so well positioned to drive us forward on that front.
Thank you. I think you alluded to your Climate Solutions at Work resource, and a couple of questions have come in around kind of where to begin. So for people who are, I'd say maybe in two different ways, people who are already in their companies, where should they start to try and have this conversation and try to drive some change within? And then a second part to that, for people who are trying to decide what they want to do, where should they be looking on kind of how to make sure that the companies are most aligned with what they want to prioritize from a personal perspective? Sorry, there was two questions there. I should have split those up.
Those are great. I think I got them both. So for those who are inside their business already, yes, we did publish last year a piece called Climate Solutions at Work that really is for any employee inside of a business who wants to contribute to climate action through their job. And so I think, in that publication, our number one recommendation is to find your people across the business, and, whether that's through a green team or, or through word of mouth, or just, finding people who are similarly climate concerned. And then, really figuring out what are the biggest leverage points that my specific company might have. So maybe if it's a larger corporation and there's a particular policy being debated in a state, like in California, for example, or at the federal level, if it's a large company and a large employer in that state, that would be a huge climate leverage point for, to try to get your company to support climate policy. And so finding, who's the policy person who would make that decision, and what do they listen to, and how can we gather employee interest in, asking for the VP of government affairs to have the company step out in support of climate action. So I think sort of finding your people, we have this practice that is called kind of power mapping, where do employees sit across the business? How can we work together to propose to the chief sustainability officer, hey, we're 8 employees across marketing, sales, and government affairs, and we, came up with this idea to do X. I think there's the sustainability officers nowadays, I think, are very, very overstretched with all of the asks on them, and are very, in my experience, typically grateful for the offer of support. And I know a lot of people who have ended up making that into their job. A person from the sales team who worked on a side project for the CSO, who then became the company's next CSO. And so our guide, and then the job function checklists that I mentioned for the 7 most common corporate job functions are another place to start to look at. If I'm in HR, how can I like provide to my boss an analysis of green 401k options that we might offer to our employees, and how can I help them get those options out? And then on the if I'm looking for a job, if I'm looking for a job, I think that's a tricky one. I mean, there are companies who are in climate solutions space, in the climate solutions space squarely, right? And that would primarily be like climate tech, or solar companies, or food, plant-based meat companies, or e-bike companies, things like that. And then there's the next layer, I think, which is traditional companies who are trying to pivot. A company like a big food company like General Mills, who's really like, we get it, we're trying to, or big auto companies who are like, wow, we really see that, EVs are the future, internal combustion engine cars are done. We're trying to like pivot our whole business model. I think that's like the next layer out. And like being in a company like that would be super powerful to help them make that pivot, and take the whole sector with them. And then I think then there's the outermost circle of businesses that I would consider, which is companies that really aren't either of those things, but they have net zero targets. So they're like ESG compliant, but they're like not really here. They're not really working on climate specifically, and they're not like making a big play to move into climate solutions. But they do have like a net zero by 2040 target like that. I think being inside that kind of a business to help accelerate that is another option. And so I think there's different places to look for those, like the ESG rankings. We can put in our follow-up email sort of where we would go to look at where businesses rank in terms of ESG. And we don't really have a comprehensive list of like climate solutions providers. But I think that's something, I could probably pretty easily look at like our list of climate solutions and then find, kind of what are like the climate tech companies operating in the EV, or the regenerative agriculture space, or the plant-based meat space.
Great, thank you. Even though I gave you a complex question, I think that was really helpful. We have a question kind of digging into one of the sectors, transportation. And so this, you mentioned this was the largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the US. Do you have any recommendations on some of the specific steps within the transportation systems that could be taken to improve?
Yeah, so the solutions that we look at in this sector are sort of in the buckets of, longer term infrastructure solutions like high-speed rail, which is public, going to require public investment. And so, like infrastructure plays like high-speed rail, denser cities, things like that, more walkable cities, bike lanes. Those are sort of infrastructure plays that are like, not immediate solutions. They require policy change. They require city involvement, not just businesses doing something. And then EVs are of course a big one around flying. We don't see a huge, very promising solution for medium and long haul flights, unfortunately. So telepresence is a big one. It's tricky though. I mean, during the pandemic, we all went to, remote, everyone canceled their business travel. We all went, to move to virtual meetings, and all air travel went way down. But after the pandemic, it's come right back up again. And so we're not seeing the uptake of those, solutions, especially inside for business travel. And then I think the there at one time, I was very optimistic that the like Ubers and Lyfts of the world were going to be a really great climate. We're going to have a really positive climate effect, that they would end up, replacing some internal or some drives, right? They were going to like end up making people feel like they didn't need a car at all. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And so we actually saw that emissions went up. They didn't contribute to any reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And so that is not at all an answer to your question. But I think I guess the solutions are, biking, walking as much as possible. E-bikes are good options. And then, at the business level, really looking at how businesses can use their clout at the policy level to move forward some of these public investments that we need for those infrastructure plays. We worked with a company, Etsy, actually last year, because Etsy was like, most of our emissions are in transportation, are in the transporting of our creators' goods from their house to the person who bought it. So most of their emissions are in transportation. So they were like, we need the US Postal Service to electrify their mail trucks if we want to be able to make our climate targets. And so we supported them in gathering some other businesses who had big transportation emissions to say, hey, USPS, we are super excited and supportive of you electrifying your fleet of delivery trucks. And then that ended up, we ended up getting that win. And so I think that's another, possibility for companies that have, transportation emissions as a significant part of their portfolio.
Thank you. There's a few questions that are kind of on the theme around equity and making sure that equity is considered when solutions are being proposed. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe how you think about that when you're doing your analysis, maybe when you're working with your different clients, making sure that whatever you're proposing does have that equity lens.
Yeah, it was definitely, so in our early research, when we first collected, all of the climate solutions from people around the world, that was one of the considerations, were whether we would include it as a climate solution, but it was slightly differently phrased. Where does it have little to no unintended consequences for local communities? And so that was one of the criteria, in addition to, is it scalable? Does it have a return on investment? And is it significant in terms of its contribution to emissions reductions or avoidance? So it was included in that way in our very initial analysis. And then since then, we have looked at specifically at a series of a sub list of our solutions that specifically have health, that have well-being, health and well-being and equity co-benefits. So solutions that specifically address, poverty alleviation, or women's empowerment, or equity. So we looked at a series of co-benefits, and then we came up with a subgroup, I think, of 20 something solutions that address other that help the world in other ways, in addition to addressing climate change. There are still some really thorny ones, like the mining for electric vehicle batteries, that in local communities, that can be problematic. And so those, I think, are really important things to be eyes wide open about. And the analysis still shows that internal combustion engine cars are far worse, even all things considered, in terms of mining for batteries for electric vehicles. But it's something that I think we need to be aware of, and work to kind of center local communities as much as possible. And then some of the solutions also center on kind of like indigenous land tenure, where we found through conversations and research that when indigenous people maintain ownership of their land, especially in biodiverse regions of the world, they tend to maintain that land and that biodiversity. And so that is also a climate solution, is empowering the rights of people around the world to their land.
Thank you. Questions are still coming in. This is wonderful. So next we have a question around, we've talked really around reducing emissions so far. How are you viewing emissions credits and offsets as a solution? Where do you see this fitting into the overall solution set?
Great question. Yeah, so we actually did an analysis over this past year to look at this question specifically, because especially in the business world, the person who asked this question is aware, it sounds like there is a big focus on carbon capture technologies. And a lot of businesses are saying, oh, we're investing in this big, this like carbon capture technology. So, and meanwhile, we're continuing to just like, continue business as usual. And so we looked into where does carbon capture as a solution sort of rank in comparison to reducing and avoiding emissions. We actually found that about 4%. So we have like a bar chart of, 100% of where, climate solutions and this sort of ratio of how much do we need to focus on electricity and transportation. And we found that removal, whether it's through natural climate solutions like planting trees or through, human engineered sinks like carbon capture, it's only 4% of the overall solution as compared to 96% of our effort should be focused on reduction and avoidance. And so I think what that led us to think was that it's a vastly over invested in and over focused on area right now, where the focus absolutely needs to be on reduction and avoidance. We don't even include carbon capture and storage as a climate solution because it doesn't meet our level of scale or return on investment yet. There's been a lot of money invested so far, and so far it has shown very little, not much in terms of scalability. So while we know we will need it, and the IP, all of the reports indicate that we will need it because of how far along we are, but we are not likely. So we need the research and investment in the R&D, but we are not going to see, it's not going to be ready and scalable until 2040s maybe. And by that time, if we continue this emissions trajectory, it's going to vastly pale in comparison to what's needed. So that's where our laser focus is on avoidance and emissions, especially in very strategic areas that can bend the curve this decade.
Thank you. Do you have any favorite companies that you think are serious and have a lot of potential to make an impact on climate?
Oh, wow. I think that there's a really exciting, like, new kind of type of company that I've been seeing that's focused on like providing solutions, like offering green 401ks or like new responsible banks, or I think there's like a new type of company that's trying to address a gap in not just not just like an Impossible Burger or a new e-bike company, but also trying to fill a gap around like, wow, we really need more options for like green 401k plans for employees. And so those kinds of there's another type of company that I've seen that I've been really excited by is like native owned solar companies, where a native nation owns and like has solar on their territory, and and is doing business with like large corporations, and then seeing the benefits of that to the tribe, and is like supporting their sovereignty. So I don't know. I guess those kinds of solutions that I feel like are not just addressing like just being another additive solution to the overall pie, but are actually trying to provide different kinds of options that move us forward to where we want to go as a world.
Thank you. And this will be our last question. And then I'll do a quick wrap up. There's obviously a lot of urgency, and there's obviously a huge challenge ahead for all of us. But what are you most optimistic about when it comes to being able to make this impact?
I mean, yeah, I think it has to be that just the sheer numbers of people who are wanting to work on it. It's like astounding. I feel so old now because I like remember when it felt like, you know, it was very lonely to be worried about climate change. And now it's like, I mean, it really feels like there is a line around the block of people wanting to work on this issue, trying to figure out their inroad. And now I think that's the big challenge is like, you know, how do we get all of that energy working on this problem, have like the millions of hands on this boulder, pushing it up the hill. So that like gives me chills to just how many people want to work on it and all the ways that everyone's like trying to figure it out together. That's super exciting for me.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for this excellent conversation and all of the information and resources that you shared with us today. I know this is going to be really impactful to a lot of our audience who are getting ready to figure out their next steps during their careers and their MBA journey. Thank you also to everyone who was able to join us today. We're thrilled to have you here and encourage you to follow us again on climatecap.org. Join us for our mailing list so you can stay up to date for information about our summit tickets going on sale in late October, as well as the MBA Academy future events and our fellowship applications opening up on October 3rd. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.